Hi, everybody. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. And we're reading Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. We're on chapters 23 and 24. Okay, chapter 23. That the night I was to return to the front, I sent for the porter down to hold a seat for me on the train when it came from Turin. The train was to leave at midnight. It was made up at Turin, and it reached Milan about 10:30 at night, and it lay in the station until it was time to leave. You had to be there when it came in to get a seat. The porter took a friend with him, a machine gunner on leave who worked in the tailor's shop, and was sure that between them they could hold a place. I gave them money for platform tickets and had them take my baggage. There was a big rucksack and 2 musets, a small knapsack. I said goodbye at the hospital about 5 o'clock and went out. The porter had my baggage in his lodge, and I told him that I would be at the station a little before midnight. His wife called me Signoro and cried. She wiped her eyes and shook her hands and then cried again. I patted her on the back, and she cried once more. She had done my mending, and she was a very short, dumpy, happy-faced woman with white hair. When she cried, her whole face went to pieces. I went down to the corner where there was a wine shop, and I waited inside looking out the window, and it was dark outside and cold and misty. Don't forget what misty, rain, water. I paid for my coffee and grappa, and I watched the people going by in the light from the window. I saw Catherine, and I knocked on the window. She looked, saw me, and smiled, and I went out to meet her. She was wearing a dark blue cape and a soft felt hat. We walked along together along the sidewalk past the wine shops, and then across the market square and up the street and through the archway to the cathedral square. There were streetcar tracks, and beyond them was the cathedral. It was white and wet in the mist. We crossed the tram tracks, and on our left were the shops, their windows lighted, and the entrance to the Galleria. There was a fog in the square, and when we came close to the front of the cathedral, it was very big, and the stone was wet. Would you like to go in? I asked. No, Catherine said. We walked along. There was a soldier standing with his girl in the shadow of one of the stone buttresses ahead of us, and we passed them. They were standing tight up against the stone, and he had put his cape around her. They're like us, I said. Nobody's like us, Catherine said, and she did not mean it happily. I wish they had someplace to go. It mightn't do them any good. I don't know. Everybody ought to have some place to go. They have the cathedral, Catherine said. So this is a case where you remember when we're analyzing that the narrator doesn't say who says what when, so you don't know who says this. We assume it was narrator, and Catherine. So in this case, because of these who said what, we can figure out who says, I wish they had someplace to go. That's the narrator. And why do you think he says that? It might not do them any good, she says. I don't know. Everybody ought to have some place to go. They have the cathedral, Catherine said. We were past it now, and we crossed the far end of the square and looked back at the cathedral. It was fine in the mist. We were standing in front of the leather goods shop. There were riding boots, a rucksack, and ski boots in the window. Each article was set apart as an exhibit. The rucksack, in the center, the riding boots on one side, and the ski boots on the other. The leather was dark and oiled smooth as a used saddle. The electric light made highlights on the dull oiled leather. You see how he's painting with words? You can close your eyes as I read and visualize this, or just put it in your imagination. We'll ski sometime, I said. In 2 months, there will be skiing at Murin, Catherine said. Let's go there, I said. All right, she said. So what's going on here? He's going to the front, and they're saying they're going to be going skiing. What do you think's going on here? Think about it. So we went on past the other windows and we turned down the street. I've never been this way, she says. This is the way I go to the hospital, I said, and it was a narrow street and we kept on the right side. There were many people passing in the fog and there were shops and all the windows were lighted. We looked in at a window at a pile of cheeses. I stopped in front of the armorer shop. Come in a minute, I have to buy a gun, I said. What sort of gun? She asked. A pistol. We went in and I unbuttoned my belt and I laid it with the empty holster on the counter. 2 women were behind the counter. The women brought out several pistols. It must fit this, I said, opening the holster. It was a gray leather holster and I had bought it secondhand to wear in the town. Have they good pistols? Catherine asked. They're all about the same, I said. Can I try this one? I asked the woman. I have no place now to shoot, she said, but it's very good. You will not make a mistake with it. I snapped it and pulled back the action. The spring was rather strong, but it worked smoothly. I sighted it and snapped it again. It's used, the woman said. It belonged to an officer who was an excellent shot. Did you sell it to him? I asked. Yes. Well, how did you get it back? From his orderly. Well, maybe you have mine, I said. How much is this? 50 lira. It's very cheap. All right, I said. I want 2 extra clips and a box of cartridges. She brought them from under the counter. Have you any need for a sword? She asked. I have some used swords, very cheap. I'm going to the front, I said. Oh, yes. Then you won't need a sword, she said. I paid for the cartridges and the pistol, filled the magazine and put it in place, put the pistol in my empty holster, filled the extra clips with cartridges and put them in the leather slots on the holster, and then buckled on my belt. The pistol felt very heavy on the belt. Still, I thought, it was better to have a regulation pistol. You could always get shells. Now we're fully armed, I said. That's the one thing I had to remember to do. Someone had got my other one going to the hospital. I hope it's a good pistol, Catherine said. Was there anything else, the woman asked? I don't believe so, I said. The pistol has a lanyard, she said. So I noticed. The woman wanted to sell something else. You don't need a whistle? I don't believe so. When you read about World War I, whistles were very important to telling people what to do when. So we can talk about that sometime. He doesn't need a whistle. Why? Because even though he's going to the front, he's not telling anybody what he does at the front, which is what we already know. He drives an ambulance. So he's not involved in the action per se. Got it? The woman said goodbye, and we went out onto the sidewalk, and Catherine looked in the window. The woman looked out and bowed to us. What are those little mirrors set in wood for? Those are for attracting birds, I said. They twirl them out in the field, and the larks see them and come out, and the Italians shoot them. They're an ingenious people, Catherine said. You don't shoot larks, do you, darling, in America? Not especially, I said. We crossed the street and started to walk up the other side. I feel better now, Catherine said. I felt terrible when we started. We always feel good when we're together. We always will be together. Yes, except that I'm going away at midnight, I said. Don't think about it, darling. We went up the street. The fog made the lights yellow. Are you tired? Catherine asked. How about you? I said. I'm all right. It's fun to walk. But let's not do it for too long, I said. No, she said. We turned down the street where there were no lights and walked in the street. I stopped and kissed Catherine. And while I kissed her, I felt her hand on my shoulder. She had pulled my cape around her so it covered both of us. We were standing in the street against a high wall. "Let's go someplace," I said. "Good," Catherine said. We walked along the street until it came out onto a wider street that was beside a canal, and on the other side was a brick wall and buildings. Ahead, down the street, I saw a streetcar cross the bridge. "We can get a cab at the bridge," I said. We stood on the bridge in the fog waiting for a carriage, and several streetcars passed, full of people going home. And then a carriage came along, but there was someone in it. The fog was turning to rain. Remember the importance of rain. "We could walk or take a tram, Catherine said. "One will be along," I said. They go by here." "Here one comes," she said. The driver stopped his horse and lowered his metal sign on his meter. The top of the carriage was up, and there were drops of water on the driver's coat. His varnished hat was shining in the wet. We sat back in the seat together, and the top of the carriage made it dark. "Where did you tell him to go?" she asked. "To the station. There's a hotel across from the station where we can go," I said. "We can go the way we are, without luggage?" "Yes," I said. Remember that? It was a long ride to the station up side streets in the rain. "Won't we have dinner?" Catherine asked. "I'm afraid I'll be hungry." "We'll have it in our room," she said. "I haven't anything to wear. I haven't even a nightgown." "We'll get one," I said, and I called to the driver. "Go to the Viva Manzoni, and up that." He nodded and turned off to the left at the next corner. On the big street, Catherine watched for a shop. "Here's a place," she said. I stopped the driver, and Catherine got out, walked across the sidewalk, and went inside. I sat back in the carriage, and I waited for her. It was raining, and I could smell the wet street and the horse steaming in the rain. She came back with a package and got in, and we drove on. "It's very extravagant, darling," she said, "but it's a fine nightgown." At the hotel, I asked Catherine to wait in the carriage while I went in and spoke to the manager. There were plenty of rooms, and then I went out to the carriage, paid the driver, and Catherine and I walked in together. The small boy in buttons carried the package. The manager bowed us toward the elevator. There was much red plush and brass. The manager went up in the elevator with us. "Monsieur and Madame wish dinner in their rooms?" "Yes," I said. "Will you have the menu brought up?" "You wish something special for dinner? Some game or souffle?" The elevator passed 3 floors with a click each time, and then clicked and stopped. "What have you as game?" "I could get a pheasant or a woodcock." "A woodcock," I said. We walked down the corridor. The carpet was worn. There were many doors. The manager stopped and unlocked a door and opened it. "Here you are, a lovely room." The small boy in buttons put the package on the table in the center of the room. The manager opened the curtains. "It's foggy outside," he said. The room was furnished in red plush. There were many mirrors, 2 chairs, and a large bed with a satin coverlet. The door led to the bathroom. "I will send up the menu," the manager said, and he bowed and went out. I went to the window and looked out, and then pulled the cord that shut the thick plush curtains. Catherine was sitting on the bed, looking at the cut glass chandelier. She had taken her hat off, and her hair shone under the light. She saw herself in one of the mirrors and put her hands to her hair. I saw her in 3 other mirrors. She didn't look happy. She let her cape fall on the bed. "What's the matter, darling?" I said. "I never felt like a whore before," she said. I went over to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and looked out. I had not thought it would be like this. "You're not a whore," I said. "I know it, darling, but it isn't nice to feel like one." Her voice was dry and flat. "This was the best hotel we could get in," I said. I looked out the window across the square where lights of the station I'm going to stop there for 1 second. You know where they're at, right? They're in a hotel with the red plush. This is a bawdy house, right? Right across from the station for quick flings. You understand? So she's feeling like there it is, right? I looked out the window and across the square were lights of the station. There were carriages going by on the street, and I saw the trees in the park. The lights from the hotel shone on the wet pavement. Oh, hell, I thought. Do we have to argue now? Come over here, please, Catherine said. The flatness was all gone out of her voice. Come over, please. I'm a good girl again. I looked over at the bed. She was smiling. I went over and sat on the bed beside her and kissed her. You're my good girl. I'm certainly yours, she said. After we had eaten, we felt fine. And then after, we felt very happy. And in a little time, the room felt like our home. What happened? Of course, you know what happened, right? They had sex. That's exactly what this means. Then after, they ate, had made love, and then felt very happy, like in their own home. He's going to the front. They're going to separate, right? Who knows what's going to happen during a war? So they're actually pretending a little bit. They're just not facing the reality. They're trying to stay happy. All these variety of emotions that go through people. My room at the hospital had never been our own home, and this room was our home too. It had been our own home, pardon me. And this room was our home too in the same way. So in his hospital, he was at home, and here they're at home. So the definition, what is a home? What does home mean, right? What does home mean? What does home mean? You're going to be asked in this novel to define various words: war, love, hate, home. What is a home? Home is where you make it. Is it? Catherine wore my tunic over her shoulders while we ate. We were very hungry, and the meal was good, and we drank a bottle of Capri and a bottle of Saint Estepé, and I drank most of it, but Catherine drank some, and it made her feel splendid. For dinner, we had a woodcock and soufflé potatoes and purée de marron, a salad, and zamboni for dessert. It's a fine room, Catherine said. It's a lovely room. We should have stayed here all the time we've been in Milan. It's a funny room, I said, but it's nice. Vice is a wonderful thing, Catherine said. The people who go in for it seem to have a good taste about it. The red plush is really fine. It's just the thing, and the mirror is very attractive. You're a lovely girl, I said. Well, I don't know how a room like this would be for waking up in the morning, but it's really a splendid room. I poured another glass of Saint Esteve. I wish we could do something really sinful, Catherine said. Everything we do seems so innocent and simple. I can't believe that we do anything wrong. You're a grand girl, I said. I only feel hungry. I get terribly hungry. You know why she's hungry, right? She's expecting. You're a fine, simple girl, I said. I want you to remember this line. You're a fine, simple girl. This has to do with the definition of love, doesn't it? You call your lover a fine, simple girl? I am a simple girl, she says. No one ever understood that except you. Once, when I first met you, I spent an afternoon thinking how we would go to the Hotel Cavour together and how it would be. Well, that was awfully cheeky of you. This isn't the Cavour, is it? No, I said. They wouldn't have taken us in there. They'll take us in sometime, but that's how we differ, darling. I never thought about anything. Didn't you ever at all? A little, she said. You're a lovely girl. I poured another glass of wine. I'm a very simple girl, Catherine said. I didn't think so at first, I said. I thought you were crazy. You were a crazy girl. I was a little crazy, she said, but I wasn't crazy in any complicated manner. I didn't confuse you, did I, darling? Wine is a grand thing, I said. It makes you forget all the bad. Notice how he doesn't answer the question. It's lovely, said Catherine, but it's given my father gout very badly. Have you a father? Yes, Catherine said. He has gout. You won't ever have to meet him. Haven't you a father? No, I said, a stepfather. Will I like him? You won't have to meet him, I said. We have such a fine time, Catherine said. I don't take any interest in anything else anymore. I'm so very happy married to you. The waiter came and took away the things. And after a while, right, we were very still and we could hear the rain. Down below on the street, a motor car honked. But at my back, I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. I said, I know that poem, Catherine said. It's by Marvel. But it's about a girl who wouldn't live with a man. My head felt very clear and cold, and I wanted to talk facts. Before we do that, Marvel was a poet to his coy mistress, was written by the English author and poet Andrew Marvell, either during or just before the English Interregnum, and it was published in 1681. So they're obviously educated people because they've read poetry from 1681, right? That's what people did in those days. Too bad they don't do that nowadays. Maybe we'll read Marvel one day. In any case, what is the quote? Time's winged chariot hurrying near. Time passes, doesn't it? Where will you have the baby? I asked. I don't know. The best place I can find, she said. How will you arrange it? The best way I can. Don't worry, darling. We may have several babies before the war is over. See, they really think the war is going to go on for some time. It's nearly time to go, I said. I know. You can make it time if you want. No. Then don't worry, darling. You were fine until now, and now you're worrying, I said. I won't. How often will you write? Every day. Do they read your letters? They can't read English enough to hurt any. I'll make them very confusing, Catherine said, but not too confusing. I'll just make them a little confusing. I'm afraid we have to start to go. All right, darling. I hate to leave our fine house. So do I. But we have to go. All right. But we never settled in our home. We're never settled in our home very long. But we will be. I'll have a fine home for you when you come back, she said. Maybe I'll be back right away. Perhaps you'll be hurt, just a little in the foot. Or on the lobe of the ear, I said. No, I want your ears the way they are. And not my feet? No, your feet have already been hit. We have to go, darling, really. All right, you go first. Notice there's nobody, we don't know who's saying this, right? So this is him. This is Lieutenant Henry, the narrator, right? Let's note that real fast. Narrator, Barkley. Narrator, Barkley. Narrator, Barkley. Well, Jimmy, how do you know they exchange dialogue like that? How come it can't be the same person saying it? Well, you figure it out. He's narrating dialogue, right? So if I go backwards, this is narrator, this is her. This is Barkley. This is him. Narrator. See, if you go backwards, you're going to find out this is true. So if this is true, all right, you go first. So she says, you go first, not me. I'm not going first. Chapter 24. We walk down the stairs instead of taking the elevator. That's an important point. Well, why is that important, Jimmy? Well, they take their time, right? The carpet on the stairs was worn. I had paid for dinner when it came up, and the waiter who brought it up was sitting on the chair near the door. He jumped up and bowed, and I went with him to the side room and paid the bill for the room. The manager had remembered me as a friend. This is very important. He remembered me as a friend. See my question mark? And he refused payment. What does that mean? He remembered me as a friend. That means the narrator used this hotel before. In advance, when he retired, I wonder who he was with. In advance, but when he retired, he had remembered to have the waiter stationed at the door, so he could not get out without paying. I suppose that had happened even with his friends. One had so many friends in a war. I asked the waiter to get us a carriage, and he took Catherine's package, and I was carrying, and went out with an umbrella. Outside, through the window, we saw him crossing the street in the rain. We stood in the side room, and we looked out the window. How do you feel, Cat? Sleepy, she said. I feel hollow and hungry. Didn't they just eat? Have you anything to eat? Yes, in my musette. I saw the carriage coming up, and it stopped, and the horse's head hanging in the rain, and the waiter stepped out, opened the umbrella, and came toward the hotel. We met him at the door and walked out under the umbrella down the street to the carriage at the curb. Water was running in the gutter. Water. There's your package on the seat, the waiter said. He stood with the umbrella until we were in, and I tipped him. Many thanks, pleasant journey, he said. The coachman lifted the reins and the horse started. The waiter turned away under the umbrella and went toward the hotel. We drove down the street, turned left, and then came around to the right in front of the station. There were two carabinieri standing under the light, cops, just out of the rain. The light shone on their hats. The rain was clear and transparent against the light from the station, and the porter came out from under the shelter of the station, his shoulders up against the rain. No, I said, thanks. I don't need thee. Formal, thee. He came back under the shelter of the archway. I turned to Catherine. Her face was in the shadow from the hood of the carriage. We might as well say goodbye. I can't go in? She asked. No. Goodbye, Cat. Will you tell him the hospital? Yes. Will you tell him because he speaks Italian? I told the driver the address to drive to, and he nodded. Goodbye, I said, and take good care of yourself and young Catherine. Goodbye, darling. Goodbye, I said. I stepped out into the rain, and the carriage started. Catherine leaned out, and I saw her face in the light, and she smiled and waved, and the carriage went up the street. Catherine pointed in toward the archway, telling the narrator to get in. I looked, and there were only two carabinieri in the archway, and I realized that she meant for me to get in out of the rain. I'm not going to say anything, but I think, she's basically, this little gesture, get in out of the rain, is very important because she cares about him. I went in and stood and watched the carriage turn the corner, and then I started through the station and down the runway to the train. The porter was on the platform looking for me. I followed him to the train, crowding past the people and alongside the aisle and in through the door to where the machine gunner sat in the corner of the full compartment. My rucksack and musettes were above his head on the luggage rack, and there were many men standing in the corridor, and the men in the compartment all looked at us when we came in. There were not enough places in the train for everyone, and everyone was hostile. The machine gunner stood up for me to sit down. Someone tapped me on the shoulder. I looked around. It was a very tall, gaunt captain of artillery with a red scar along his jaw. He had looked through the glass on the corridor and then come in. What do you say? I asked. I had turned and faced him. He was taller than I, and his face was very thin under the shadow of his cap visor, and the scar was new and shiny. Everyone in the compartment was looking at me. You can't do that, he said. You can't have a soldier save you a place. I've done it. He swallowed, and I saw his Adam's apple go up and then down. The machine gunner stood in front of the place. Other men looked in through the glass. No one in the compartment said anything. You have no right to do that. I was here 2 hours before you came. So what do you want? The seat, he said. So do I. I watched his face, and I could feel the whole compartment against me. I didn't blame them. He was in the right. But I wanted the seat. Still, no one said anything. Oh, hell, I thought. Sit down, Signor Capitano, I said. The machine gunner moved out of the way, and the tall captain sat down. He looked at me. His face seemed hurt, but he had the seat. Get my things, I said to the machine gunner. We went out into the corridor, and the train was full, and I knew there was no chance of a place. I gave the porter and machine gunner 10 lira apiece, and then I went down the corridor and outside on the platform looking in the windows, but there were no more places. Maybe someone will get off at Brescia, the porter said. More will get on at Brescia, said the machine gunner. I said goodbye to them, we shook hands, and they left. They both felt badly. Inside the train, we were all standing in the corridor when the train started. I watched the lights of the station and the yards as we went out, and it was raining, and soon the windows were wet, and you could not see. Wet? Remember wet? Right? Later, I slept on the floor of the corridor, first putting my pocketbook with my money and papers in it inside my shirt and trousers so that it was inside the leg of my breeches. I slept all night, waking at Brescia and Verona when more men got on the train, but going back to sleep at once. I had my head on one of the musettes and my arms around the other, and I could feel the pack, and they could all walk over me if they wouldn't step on me. Men were sleeping on the floor all down the corridor. Others stood holding to the window rods and leaning against the doors. That train was always crowded. Wow. And you have a sense, if you've been reading about World War I, what's going on. All these men are going back to the front to perhaps die. Before we leave, I thought what we would do is read Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress to get a sense of the poem that they had read and remembered when they were in the hotel. To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell. Had we but world enough and time, this coyness, lady, were no crime. Look up the word coyness. What is coy? Being coy. Oh, well, being coy, right? We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find. I by the tide of humbler would complain, and I would love you 10 years before the flood. And you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love should grow vaster than empires and more slow, and 100 years should go to praise thine eyes and thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest, an age at least to every part, and the last age should show thy heart. For, lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at a lower rate. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. See? There's the line. And yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vault shall sound my echoing song. But then worms shall try that long preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. So now, therefore, while thy youthful hue sits on thy skin and like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may. And now, like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour than languish in this slow-chapped power. Let us roll all of our strength and all of our sweetness up into one ball and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run. It's a beautiful poem, right? He's trying to tell the young lady, let's not hold on to something that, you die, right? He's trying a little seduction going on. Time's winged chariot hurrying near. There used to be a radio show that had a metronome. Tick, tick, tick. I can see my metronome. I should walk over and get it. I'm going to get it. Hold on. I got it. You know what a metronome is? It keeps time. Ready? There used to be a radio show that started. It wasn't using a metronome. It was using a gong. And it used to start out with these words. It's later than you think. I'm not suggesting you go out and do what the hell you want, but I am suggesting to understand the value of time, knowing your place in it, and understanding this novel, because that's what's going on here. If you remember, Ferguson said, don't get Catherine in trouble. That's exactly what he did. He got her in quote unquote trouble. Is having a baby trouble? No, it's not trouble. But during a war, it could be trouble, right? We want to think about that and motivation and everything that happened in these 2 chapters before he goes to the front. Remember, you can do anything you want, right? Within reason. And what the narrator tells us that he did is very important to understanding his character, because he's in the story. Everything in here is him telling us what happened. So did he really go to this quote unquote red plush hotel before they left to make love? Absolutely. Of course he did. And she's also already pregnant. So we know she didn't get pregnant here. She was already pregnant from what they were making love before. But that's okay. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying you have to understand motivations of people and what they do and why they do it. What is Lieutenant Henry's motivation? What is her motivation? If he takes her to a hotel and her first reaction is, I never felt like a whore, that tells you something. That tells you something about her. And remember, he didn't have to say that to us. He didn't have to tell us that, but he did. Why is he telling us that? That's for us to figure out, right? You've been reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. Hold on. Thanks for visiting. He's going back to the front. We were reading Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. I hope you come to me for read with me for the next chapters. This was chapter 23 and 24. He's on the train now. You saw the encounter with the tall artillery captain. Remember that? He obviously could have picked a fight, but he didn't. He gave up his chair, insulted him. The guy took the chair. He felt a little hurt, and then he ends up sleeping on the floor. Remember, if you have questions, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Before you go, let me just do one thing there. I think I forgot to tell you. They were in the last chapter before we got to these chapters, there was a reference that a coward dies many times, but a hero dies but once. In Act 2, Scene 2 of Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare, Caesar says to Calpurnia, cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. If you remember that conversation, I think Catherine said they die 1,000 times or whatever, but this is where it comes from. So The narrator is obviously educated, right? Because we saw Andrew Marvell quoted, and you'll see other references and allusions. Cowards die many times before their deaths, but the valiant never taste of death but once. Is that true? What is a coward? There's more words you got to define. Hero, coward, valiant, right? Thanks for reading. See you soon. Take care of yourself.